Hello and welcome to another episode in our mini-series from the Developing Practice podcast. This series is all about hybrid practice, whether that be leading hybrid teams, developing hybrid teaching or working in a hybrid manner. We have spoken with lots of guests over the past couple of years and have extracted snippets of conversations for this series. Today's compilation is all about ensuring well-being in a hybrid environment. We hope you enjoy.
The speed and scale of change that we continue to experience has forced colleagues to find new ways of navigating existing responsibilities and processes, while at the same time taking on new activities and balancing new expectations. And all of that's happened without necessarily, I suppose, having the luxury of time for preparation and planning. That in itself is really challenging and can have a really significant impact on how one feels about one's own performance, one's ability to do the job, and therefore one's well-being. For leaders and managers, just as an aside, I think that issue is perhaps two-sided. You know, as leaders struggle with these same issues and feelings personally, they also have to try and consider the implications for their team members, help them cope and adjust to those changes, often while engaging in leadership from a distance without the ability to meet colleagues in person, you know, filtered through all of these technologies that we've now become so familiar with. We're really talking about culture, aren't we? The culture of the organization and how that's been affected. And I think that's a really fascinating topic for consideration. We have to remind ourselves that the context in which these changes have come about is not a normal context. The very real worry, stress, and concern that we've all experienced for our families, our friends, our colleagues, and our students is the background in which these changes to our practice have happened. So we began this process of adapting and responding in the teeth of a crisis, the scale and severity of which at the time was unclear. And it's against that backdrop that we ask more of ourselves than we ever have, and of our teams and of the wider university. So for many of us, it wasn't so much working at home as working at home in a crisis, and for some, living at work. Let's not forget those who've still been on campus, technicians, estates teams, many academic staff, who've also been dealing with all these challenges, but also navigating all the worry that has brought, the coming into campus, the travel, etc. So against that backdrop, I think it's been remarkable to see the inherent strengths of our community come to the fore. We've witnessed the power of collective wisdom and effort. In a remarkably short space of time, we can achieve something, you know, really impressive if we pull together. However, I think it's equally true that at some point we have to stop and take stock. As much as that's possible to do, we have to draw a line and move forward with a slightly different mindset. And this might be controversial to some people while we're still dealing with lots of these challenges, but I genuinely mean this in a positive sense. From a well-being perspective, we need to develop a recognition of a new business as usual, you know, as we build a new culture, a new working culture at the university, as opposed to continuing to work in crisis mode. You know, that has a very real negative impact, operating in that heightened state over a long period of time, not least in terms of mental health and physical exhaustion. And I think we're starting to see this develop now, this new sort of sense of business as usual. I think it's beginning to emerge as we continue to make sense of where we are now within this new working reality. I think evidently change of this sort will continue to be with us for some time. And the focus of that will shift. It will not least gradually to returning to campus, at least partially, and transitioning to a new working model. It's important to recognise that hybrid practices will continue to be a key part of that as we go forward.
So you've mentioned a few times the impact of the last few months on our well-being, and it was interesting during lockdown, the wellbeing podcast was one of the most listened to podcasts actually. So people were obviously maybe struggling in this area or exploring this area. Do you think there are any other implications for our practice and what we need to do next in terms of that specific area of well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the podcasts on wellbeing were brilliant and really timely. And it's one of the things that I've been really gratified by actually is the extent to which in the midst of all of this, you know, change and the speed of change, we have genuinely as a team and as an institution, you know, as colleagues, we have had a real concern for well-being, you know, and for the well-being of our wider institution. One of the key elements that I mentioned briefly earlier is how all this has affected the patterns and routines of our working life. but also life more generally. So, to use an analogy, maybe from my point of view, I describe it as the grammar of our working lives has been disrupted and in some ways forcibly discarded. So whereas previously our day was punctuated by regular and expected rhythm of events and interactions, changes of place and context, transitions between home and workspaces, between office, classroom and lab, and the physical act of movement that entailed, moving between those spaces. Now, many of us sit in a single space, as I certainly do, with no interaction other than online. So in a way, the punctuation and the sort of the syntax of our daily working experience is gone. So for instance, the commute is a really clear example, isn't it? I personally never thought I would miss the windswept reality of Wigan North Western Station at 6 o'clock in the morning. But the commute did at least provide a sort of a clear transition point between working and non-working time. However late the train or however bad the traffic jam, it functioned as a time to decompress, to switch between what we might call a work mindset and a home mindset. Similarly, that chance conversation in the kitchen whilst making a brew or in the coffee shop at lunch, that all of those things provided a change of pace and a change of gear, which for many of us no longer exists. So these everyday encounters and movements were symbols of normality, of our ontological security from a philosophy point of view. And until we replace them, until we actively develop a new grammar that effectively punctuates and structures our working lives, I think we may well begin to, continue to feel slightly off kilter. So working out how we do that, how we genuinely embed a new sense of normality into our working practices, will clearly be both an individual task and one that requires, again, the collective wisdom of our wider community. But I've no doubt that we can achieve that if we work together. It's an interesting one to consider, though. Why do feelings still feel strange? Why do I still not feel quite at ease, even though, as we've said, we're now really used to working in this way? And from my perspective, it is some of those extraneous things that were just part of our lived reality that we've not yet replicated in this new way of working that we're currently experiencing.
No, we certainly haven't. I don't miss the windswept crew station at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, come on.
But yeah, the decompression on the way home is definitely something that is missing now. I guess we're all doing a similar thing. Like, I'm in my kitchen, I switch my laptop off 5:30, and then I immediately walk across to the kettle and make a brew, start making tea. There's no gap in between at all. And it's strange because there's not that time to think about what's happened during the day and just to put it in some sort of order. So yeah, that's definitely missing.
Yeah, I think it is that. It's kind of, you would naturally, not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously, I think in those times, those spaces that we had in the day, even, walking through campus, seeing all the life and vibrancy of campus and our students and colleagues walking between offices or between teaching classrooms or meetings. All of those spaces in everyday life gave us time to even subconsciously filter the events of the day, to kind of place things in our schema of priorities, to work out what we were going to think about next, to make a mental note of something that we pick up or follow up later. And to some extent, what we find ourselves in now, if we're not careful, is a routine whereby we're moving directly from one meeting on the hour to the next meeting 1 minute past the hour. And almost the time to process, which is such an important part of intellectual activity, that making sense of, that synthesis process, has kind of been has been the thing that we've lost. And that's, really problematic for the kinds of roles that we all do and that colleagues in universities obviously engage in. So I think we are duty bound as individuals to find the spaces in our days to do that activity. And I think we as developers and as part of the organizational teams are duty bound to help other people to do that as well. I think it's important, though, that we don't pretend we've just got the answer. Yeah. And what works for some people in their lived reality won't work for other people in theirs. Again, we come back to that differentiated impact bit. But we should be giving people the space to think about their solutions and giving them the support to work out ways of providing those gaps and those spaces in their daily life. We've got to find a kind of a new working reality that adjusts and makes sense of how we are now and where we are now. And that isn't one which is just Zoom meeting to team meeting to Zoom meeting. you make the point about that, turning the laptop off or closing the laptop case and going and making a brew, and all of a sudden you're home and you're expected to just be in home mode. Well, I'm sure, you'd have the same experience as me. It doesn't work like that. And that can cause tensions, let's face it.
Yeah.
So I think for our general well-being, it's really, really important that we give ourselves the opportunity to individually and collectively think about how we make this work in a sustainable way, whilst taking a really clear view on well-being as part of that.
Denise, what are we talking about when we're talking about researchers' well-being? How would we define that?
I think that's a really interesting question. And for me, well-being means different things to different people. I think there's two things, actually. I think there's a personal well-being, which we kind of are more familiar with. How much sleep we get, are we active? Our general health and well-being, what's our mental health like? Are we developing ourselves? Are we feeling fulfilled? And I think there's a personal side, but I also think there's a professional side as well. And that's around, for me, I call it psychological safety. So how safe are you at work? Are you feeling valued? Do you make a contribution? Do you feel in control of your work? And I think there's different factors. They're different influences. And one of the things that we're going to be doing in the wellbeing workshops that we've put together is around, we all know how to, so if you're trying to lose weight, we all know how to do that. You just don't eat as much and go for, you do a bit more exercise. So why is it so difficult? And so what the wellbeing workshops are going to do and look at is how do you get some tips to do something about that? So for me, it's around, our well-being is all about, it's an inside job. It's our minds, and our brains are amazing things, but we don't know how they work very often. So it's around how do we understand ourselves more? What our motivations, what limits us, what stops us and gets in the way, because we all kind of know what to do. So I've taken two approaches to it, and again put them in, because I think actually they're the things that impacts our well-being.
I think that's really helpful. If I reflect back on my work with my students, if there's an issue impacting their well-being, then I could be the best lecturer in the world. But if there's issues going on in their life, like you said, they're not getting enough sleep, or they're worrying about something and it's having that impact on their well-being, then they're never going to learn as effectively as they could do. And I guess that's the same for your work, Angela, with researchers. If there's issues impacting their well-being, then you could be the best developer in the world, but there's always going to kind of be that barrier. Do you find there's quite a big issue in terms of researcher well-being at the moment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you have to look at the full picture. You have to look at everything involved in that. I'm not sure that it's a bigger issue than it ever has been, really. I think that there's not necessarily something new now. Of course, the COVID-19 situation has brought, strangeness in that, really. And I suppose the Welcome Reimagine Research campaign has really sort of a focus on it and made it kind of more of an open discussion, I suppose. But the Academy has always done a lot of work around, the well-being of researchers, especially sort of with the Concordat, to support the career development of researchers. And for those that don't know, that's an agreement between funders and employers in the UK, and sets out expectations and responsibilities for those that are involved in research careers. And that will be people, the researchers themselves, their managers, their PIs, employers and funders. And three of the main principles of the Concordat, one of which is environment and culture. So very much thinking about, the culture, the well-being, I suppose, within that of the researchers. And I think an important example of how the Concordat sort of impacts on the University of Liverpool is the statement of expectations that the University of Liverpool has for principal investigators and researchers. And that again defines some responsibilities and the roles for research staff. and PIs. And this again emphasises on leadership and communication and environment and all that sort of thing. So yes, I do think wellbeing may feel like it's in the forefront now, but I think it is something that, you know, has always been an issue and something that we do have to consider with the development of staff.
I think going on from what Angela said as well is that actually, you know, one of the requirements of being a researcher is to innovate. You know, if we're not looking after ourselves and we are anxious or fearful or frustrated, our brain chemicals are very different to those where we need to be able to innovate. So I think it starts by really simply understanding, if I'm anxious, I can't innovate. So how do I make that change, and what's getting in the way of me being anxious, and how can I stop that?
So Denise, could you give us a couple of the kind of practical tips that you give people in your coaching in terms of addressing exactly what you've just said?
So there's a couple of things around the mind management stuff. So this came from a researcher, and he was going for an interview, and he said, "I'm not very good at interviews." And I said, "Well, who's told you that?" So I said, "Well, how did you get this job then?" "Oh, okay. So you must have, did you have an interview for this?" "Oh, yes." "Okay." So you must be okay. So anyway, so what we did was we understood, so where's that come from? And actually, it had come from something some time ago. I'd gone for an interview, it had gone horrendous. It was a very traumatic experience, but actually the brain had lodged that as a memory. Okay. So what happened was he catastrophized that every time he was going to go for an interview, then that was going to come up. So actually, so the tip is to understand is that true, and actually how can you start to become aware of what you're thinking and what would be a more helpful thought. So he'd made up a whole story that he wasn't very good at interviews, and what we did was we got some evidence to say, well, actually, is that true? Well, it wasn't on that occasion, but on another 6 times then it was. So, and then very often when you're working with coaching, I take them to what's the worst thing? So very often is, I want to apply for this job, and then they give me 36 reasons why they're not going to and why they won't get it, all in the same sentence. Go, wow, that's amazing. So let's just break that down, okay? And it's that chimp brain. So the chimp is thinking, oh my gosh. So I said, what's the worst thing that happens if you go for that interview? Don't get the job. And then what happened? Just apply for another one. So very often it's just a coaching role very often is offering a different perspective. And again, people work differently. So within the research community, there's a lot of probably more introverted and reflective people than they're more extroverted, and I'm very much generalizing here, but with a more extroverted person, they might talk that out, whereas an introverted person will reflect it. And both can catastrophize, but they'll do it in different ways. So if I'm working with a group of researchers, what very often we'll do that exercise. So who thinks more like this and who thinks more like this? And how does that show up in your world? Because you'll have to, it's no good saying to the introverted person who likes to sit and reflect, well, you need to stand up and shout and do that, because that's just not going to work. You need to get coaching tips and solutions that are going to work for that person. And they all have the lovely thing about coaching, the fundamental belief in coaching is that the person that I'm working with, the researcher, the academic, whoever it is resourceful and whole. They're the expert in their life. I'm not there to tell them anything. I might have some tips, but my job is to ask questions so that they're empowered they know the answers, 100% know the answers or know where to get them.
Yeah, and I guess as you tease that out, the outcome is that is usually a positive impact in terms of their well-being. Is that right?
100%, yeah. 100%, because very often it's I feel better, simply sometimes having the opportunity to talk in a safe space. So in the small groups with researchers, very often it can be quite lonely, I'm feeling this. I'm not very good at this, or I feel like I'm drowning in work. And you put a few people together and have a conversation. You don't change the problem or the challenge, but you just feel more normal about it. Oh, okay, well, I'm not on my own with that. So that's that, and that changes your brain chemicals. So that starts making you feel better anyway.
One of the things that we're discussing in the university at the moment is the well-being of staff, particularly those who have been on campus throughout the pandemic. We've got technicians working in labs and cleaning staff, for example. Some academics have been on campus, and we are worried about their well-being, as well as their motivation to keep going. What have you done around staff well-being, or how have you maintained that throughout the pandemic?
I'd like to say really well, but I think, if I'm honest, there's probably things that I still feel that we've been not as good as I'd like us to be, if in truth. I think we've done a lot of things that others have done. I think there's a great thing about physical presence, believe it or not, and we got into a lot of debate about that. And at the town hall now, there's probably not more than 30 people here, and that's kind of ebbed and flowed. But I've done this thing about coming into the office, and it's not being heroic, to be quite honest. It's one of the safest places, but it is a bit about that kind of thing, that you're there. You know what I mean? Because if I'm honest, it's and that I think is something that all my leaders have done, which is, it's really hard if you're a waste collection refuse person, when we're saying, can you go out there and continue to do the bins whilst we sat at home, as we're doing here, or me in the office, where I'm sat in the sanctity of the office. So there's a bit about feasibility. So we've done a little bit of that, and the team has done that, where we try to make sure there's a physical presence. There's a lot of messaging, a hell of a lot of comms, which we've ebbed and flowed, because again, it becomes a bit tired and stale. So in the early days, a lot of stuff around messages of the days and things around, look, this is what we're going on, and thank you very much, and a lot of kind of personal thank yous, which again is wrapped up in our values and behaviours for the council, in terms of what, about kind of saying thank you, really, because people have gone the extra mile. We've increasingly used webinars. We did one last week which was open to all staff. Didn't get a huge number. We got about 700 out of 2,500, but 700 is still not bad, but it could be much better. Talking about, 1, saying thank you, 2, recognising how challenging it has been, 3, these are the levels of areas of support you can get, these are the places, 4, let us tell you about the pandemic and where we might be going, and then finally we ended up a little bit just to make everyone really feel happy about the budget, but we just passed it, we thought we had to say something on that. And then we got an event, which this is virtual, so we've slightly changed it this year. So we've gone into partnership with, there's 2 things actually. One, we've done a partnership event with the local media, local news media, about recognising people who've gone the extra mile in terms of COVID over the last year. And of course, we're coming up to the anniversary of that, so we'll weave into some of that, the kind of, again, a sense of recognition and thank you, as well as recognising those people who've lost their lives. But also, we've got a Staff Awards event, which we've shifted this year, which is more universal, because if I'm honest, we talked about it, I don't want to get into nominating individuals, because there's always going to be more individuals, and nearly all the whole team and staff group of the council who've just been brilliant, whilst we were consulting at one point on our cuts for pay, we were having to look at an extra day, 3 days leave to get our savings. Now, unfortunately, we've been able to move that out, but it isn't a really good message, is it? Do I feel happy about it? Do I feel proud of it? Absolutely not. But we were really wrestling with this huge financial number, and therefore, there are things we've done that I don't think I'm so proud of, like that. But we had to balance the budget. It's now been removed. We've achieved that through political leadership, which I'm really pleased with. But we've gone as far as I think we can. But I think that the challenge is also the final thing, where we've tried to accommodate the well-being, which is a bit more subtle, is we've not been fixed and wedded to an all-out, if you're working in an office space, that you must work from home. So we've tried to make it as person-centred as possible. For some people, it's an absolute godsend. It fits in with lifestyle. They've got, people got offices in their houses and the rest of it. For others, if you're a younger person who's living in someone's home, or someone who really is isolated and they've got no friends, then we've tried to bend the rules without compromising anything as much as possible. But if I'm honest, answering your question, Matthew, I'm not really satisfied with it. It's one of those things I always feel I don't personally feel that we do enough on that front. And I think there will be some real consequences when we get back into, in inverted commas, some kind of normal living, because I think the impact on people's well-being, I think the actual impact and discipline of being and coming into work is going to be really strange for some people. And if some employers really want people to come in and are really kind of rigid about it, I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge for people, because in a sense they've just not been used to it, because we've all had to adjust this new approach, and in some senses it's like anything, it becomes the norm, and then it's like, oh, I've got to go back to this building to do this, why? But I think we've got to be flexible about that, and as long as the business is done and the core stuff's done, it doesn't really matter how you do it, as long as it's done to a good standard.